This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, from Philadelphia to Erie and from Scranton to Pittsburgh, it's Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenawalt, Senior Fellow at the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and I'm joined by my co-host, Maura Donnelly. Maura, hi.
Hello, Charlie.
Well, since we were last with our viewers, there's some things happened in Philadelphia that were pretty exciting.
Very exciting. We won the Super Bowl.
Were you as excited as I was?
Yeah, that was a really, really good game. It was just any team that can beat New England is a good team in my book, but it was especially fun because it was the home team.
Well, a lot of Super Bowls were actually boring, but this was exciting from beginning to end, wasn't it?
Yeah. And which was good because the commercials weren't all that good. So, we got a good game this time. Sometimes it's the opposite.
And the city of Brotherly Love celebrated in a brotherly love way.
Yeah.
They didn't burn the
Mostly.
city down.
Yeah.
And someone who can comment on that is our guest today, because he's
a native Philadelphian.
A native Philadelphian, and that is Gene Barr, who is...
Meaning I've burned the city down before? Or what's
Well, Gene, you are the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. We're happy to have you back with us.
It's great to be here, and thank you for commenting on, as a native of the Philadelphia area. Yes, we're very excited. In fact, the Chamber had a little fun with it last week. We announced we have Alex Trebek for our gubernatorial debate this year at the Chamber dinner, and it was incredible. We had national attention to it. Good Morning America, ABC World News Tonight, Fox, CNN, all kinds of national coverage. The Washington Post wrote about it, and then we saw that the Boston Globe retweeted the Washington Post story. So we responded to that by saying, thanks, Boston Globe, for the shout-out. It's great to have Alex Trebek and the Lombardi Trophy. So we're happy to do a little trash talking on the Chamber dinner.
They regretted that.
Yeah. Gee, it's even filtered down to the local level. I always go into my state and local government classes, and I ask them what's new. Generally, I'm met with silence. The other day, I went in and I said, what's new? And a young man raised his hand and said, Alex Trebek is coming to moderate the gubernatorial debate. And I thought, what has happened?
It's going everywhere. We love it. We love
Wow.
it. It is a great opportunity for us, and in reality, it isn't. It's good to have Alex Trebek, but what we found is he has given a significant sum of money to his alma mater in Canada to establish kind of a post on civic dialogue in public policy. So there really is a great tie, and it ties in with a civility award we're going to give out this year for the second year in a row.
Okay, so before we move on, because we have a lot to talk about,
We do.
Date of the annual dinner.
October 1st.
October 1st. Ooh, that's new.
Yes,
Isn't it
we
usually in
had to
September?
shift it. We have to take it, as you know, in the whatever date's available. It's almost always September, but we're October 1 this year.
So we'll make sure our viewers know that, so they
Absolutely.
can come
Great.
to the event and see Alex.
Well, I'm going to let you kick off. You give the first question.
Well, okay, so we've got a lot to cover. So
We do.
let's start with the budget.
Sure.
I know that there are some business tax discussions, potential reduction of the corporate net income tax, but it's tied to something that doesn't make any sense. Can you fill our viewers in on?
Yeah, look,
on that?
for a long time, this Commonwealth, the government, the governor, the House, the Senate have known that our corporate net income tax rate is much too high. It makes us uncompetitive.
Right.
It just happened at the federal level where there was a recognition that 35% is too high and makes us uncompetitive nationally. They cut that to 21. We need to have similar conversation here. The trouble is there's this desire to link it to what would be a very cumbersome, burdensome, in fact, we believe, counterproductive effort in terms of how you calculate those corporate net income taxes.
And is that the unitary combined?
That's the mandatory unitary combined reporting. Exactly. So we oppose that. The other tax, which is absolutely not only a business tax, but is a tax on Pennsylvania's energy consumers, is another additional tax on the natural gas industry. And
wait, another one?
Another one. On top of the impact tax.
Okay.
This would be a severance tax.
Gotcha.
On top of that, and of course that comes on top of all the other business taxes. So for people who use natural gas to heat their homes, for people who use electricity that's powered by natural gas, this would have an adverse impact on them. In addition to the fact that it would make investment in Pennsylvania a little more questionable, maybe a lot more questionable.
How's it looking in the House and Senate on both those?
Well, of course, the Senate last year passed a severance as well as a gross receipts tax. It didn't go anywhere in the House. It stalled, and I think the Senate hopefully will say, look, we did it last year. We can't come to grips with this. So, letting that go. The issue, the interesting thing is, and I think this is something that certainly bears repeating, this severance debate is really being driven by government unions who want more money. The pension costs have now risen to 15% of the general fund budget. There's a tremendous desire for more money to cover the pensions. Some of that is due to retroactive benefit increases from many years ago, but they want more money for government spend, so they're willing to take the money from wherever they can in this short-term bet and hope that it doesn't have long-term consequences, and we believe that it will. I mean, Pennsylvania's competing for these dollars with other places like Texas and Louisiana and Oklahoma. And if we make it unproductive to be here, those dollars will go elsewhere.
Wow.
Well, Gene, has the natural gas industry countered the argument about the severance tax with a response, something on the, we'll accept the severance tax, but then we expect the local impact tax to go away?
Well, that's a great that's a great concept, and let's go back and look at that. When the industry accepted a local impact tax back a number of years ago, they also got some additional things from their side that says, let's make permitting a little bit more predictable. Let's make zoning a bit more predictable. Let's go through some of these. A court went through after that was passed, struck down all of the things that the industry needed to make itself more competitive, so the industry is left with a brand new impact tax. So they are justifiably skittish about going back into that and have something that this court, and we've seen what this court is willing and able to do, that would strike that down.
We're going to talk about that.
And we're going to talk about that.
Back to that.
And so the industry is justifiably reluctant to enter into any of those because of the fact that it could all fall apart. So this is an industry that, we talk a lot about Amazon and about the 50,000 jobs that Amazon's going to bring to wherever the lucky city gets it. In Pennsylvania is one of only 2 states that has 2 potential sites. Philadelphia and Pittsburgh are 2 of the last 20 sites. We've already had 2 Amazons come. It's called the natural gas industry. They brought close to 100,000 jobs.
What are we going to do to mess that up then?
Exactly. And they have not said, when the natural gas industry came in, they didn't say we want X billions of dollars. They said we want predictable zoning, predictable permitting. We're willing to pay what we need to, including the 9.99 corporate net income tax rate, but yet we continue to try and find new taxes to foist on them, even though they have driven down costs to heat and cool homes significantly in this Commonwealth.
Gene, have there been studies done of the other states that have severance taxes to show the effect that had on the industry in those states and those state economies?
It's a great question, because the reality is it's hard to compare apples and apples. For example, people will say, well, Texas has a severance tax. They do. But Texas's corporate net income tax rate is 0 because they don't have one. So companies don't say, well, we'll go there because they don't have a severance. Companies look at it, as you know, and say, what's our total tax burden? What's our total tax burden here? And people talk a lot about the impact tax. The reality is in 2016, the impact tax given to Pennsylvania raised more money than 4 other states' severance taxes, even though the combined output of those 4 other states was more than than total output in Pennsylvania. So the impact tax is delivering dollars for all of Pennsylvania.
Okay, so we're going to shift gears
Sure.
here because you've got other issues we want to make sure we cover. You are big supporters of Senate Bill 936, which
Yes.
is a prescription formulary drug bill for workers' comp.
Yes.
What does that mean? Tell me what that means.
What it means is it would give more predictability. When somebody goes in and you go to see your doctor, you've had a workplace injury, that doctor will know in advance what is actually going to be allowed if he prescribes. It also gives the advantage and says, if I want to go outside those parameters and those guidelines, that there is a process for that, and that's driven by Department of Labor and Industry. Drug formularies are used in Medicare, Medicaid, CHIP, and private health insurance. These are nothing new. This is not putting, as some critics have claimed, it puts people, middle person in the insurance industry between you and your doctor. The reality is not that. In fact, the Hospital Association of Pennsylvania supports this bill. The Medical Society, once they found out that there is an appeals option, they have no problem with the bill. They're fine with it. So we've done this in many, many other states. In fact, the bill blatantly says that any savings must be passed back to the employer and not kept by the insurance company.
And ultimately, this would have a significant impact on the opioid problems in Pennsylvania, correct?
Absolutely it would. When you look at the experience in states like Ohio, where they have driven down the rates of injured workers addicted to opioids by 50%, you wonder why Pennsylvania can't pass this. A lot of this is also driven by an interesting story in the Philadelphia Inquirer last fall, which detailed allegations against a a Philadelphia law firm that at that point owned their own pharmacy and had some, according to the Enquirer again, alleging some very interesting ties between them.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we want to make sure we have time to talk about the big issue, gerrymandering, redistricting.
Whatever we're going to call it.
Whose map stands? Where are we on this? What's the Supreme Court doing? Whatever you want to...
Chaos. Absolute chaos.
Constitutional crisis, as Jake Foreman calls it?
Yeah, I think it probably is. When you get down to figuring out what's the role of the court and the role of the legislature and significant uncertainties and legislators, bringing action in both federal court as well as taking immediately the U.S. Supreme. Yeah, I think it's fair to say this is a constitutional. I'm not an attorney, but I think for us, from the business community, I think it's something that tremendously concerns us because of the impression and the image it sends to people looking to invest in this Commonwealth. Look, we've come off some very difficult budgets that have gone and dragged on. This just adds to, geez, you guys have got to get your act together there.
We don't look good.
It does not look good. And for the court to, move forward on this, give the legislature literally, was it 3 weeks, not provide them with the blueprint how to get there for 2 weeks. It was incredible.
Well, Gene, the congressional district map probably was gerrymandered, and so was every other map before it. Back to the early 60s, whoever controls the legislature gets to draw the congressional lines. That's the law. Now all of a sudden we don't want to abide by that law. It seems to me, could there be something bigger here? A desire to reduce the number of Republican congressmen from Pennsylvania so you have a better chance of perhaps impeaching President Trump if the Democrats do well in the midterm elections.
Well, I think you can ascribe a number of different motivations to this. The reality is this map was passed with Republican and Democrat votes. As you know, look, everyone has tried to figure out what gerrymandering means. Even the U.S. Supreme Court hasn't figured it out yet, although they've got, I believe, 2 cases in front of them now. I think a Wisconsin and a Maryland case. I don't know why this court here didn't wait for the U.S. Supreme to opine about what are the limitations on that. And they threw this into chaos without waiting for that.
And it's really chaos for the current candidates who don't know what the district is that they're running in, and
absolutely,
it's really a mess.
I live in the 4th Congressional, literally lifted up and slung over to the eastern part of the state.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Oh
We've never seen a power grab like this by the state Supreme Court in my memory of Pennsylvania government.
But it's not over. It's not over.
And I think it is. I think the constitutional crisis issue is valid. I think that it is.
Well, Gene, we need you to come back and talk about this with us
We
again.
do a whole show on
Unfortunately, we're out of time for this segment, and we've got to take a break. We'll be right back with the next segment of Behind the Headlines. Stay tuned.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much, Gene.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. The Pennsylvania Chamber serves as the frontline advocate for business on Pennsylvania's Capitol Hill by influencing the legislative, regulatory, and judicial branches of state government. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Hi, welcome back to Behind the Headlines. On this segment, Maura and I are lucky enough to have a new guest, someone that's
an old friend.
An old friend, but a new guest, and that is David Sanko. Dave is the executive director of the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors. Before we go to Dave, did you know that there's a new report from the American Psychological Association that says Americans are exhausted all the time?
I believe that.
And why? Why?
We just work too much. It's like 24/7 now with technology. You cannot escape it.
Well, local government is not exhausted, and local government works all the time.
They might be tired. They might be a little tired.
And particularly our township. So on that note, I want to turn to you, Dave. Dave, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Well, we turn to Abraham Lincoln. And of course, Abraham Lincoln said that it's government of the people, by the people, for the people, local government is the closest thing that the founding fathers sort of envisioned when they created this democracy. We just finished another election cycle, and participation seemed to be low. What happened?
Well, I think at the local level, we often see there's a lot of media attention on the national elections, on presidentials having high turnout, and then the other congressional elections in the off year having the next highest level, and local elections having the least amount of participation. And oftentimes I think that's the case because of lack of media attention, but also satisfaction within the community that things are going okay. And we had there was a lot of participation. There were some uncontested races, which I think are not a function of people not caring as much as it is a function of people being satisfied with the level of service and the type of service they're getting at their community. But we also had a fair amount of turnover that was brought on by retirements from long-serving folks and new folks. And we know that because we've had a 30% uptick in people participating in our training programs for newly elected folks. So that we're trying to give them some baseline education on what's involved in being township supervisors.
So the disenchantment that we're seeing with the state and federal officials is not necessarily trickling down to the local level?
I think that's accurate. I think the level of dysfunction that you find in Washington and Harrisburg is not replicated at the local level. Part of that is maybe as a result of there not being as much partisan banners and labels put on at the local level, and people just who serve in local government, they just get the job done. They just want to help their neighbors. There's not a Republican way or a Democrat way to plow a road or to run a park. There is the right way and the wrong way, and they're incredibly accountable to local residents because they're their neighbors.
They're
and
right
they're
there.
They're going to see them every day. They're going to see them at church and the ball field and the post office and the grocery store. And they are perhaps more in tune and more in touch with residents 24/7, if you will, because there's really very few places you can go where you're not going to run into somebody who's going to ask you about something.
No place to hide.
No place to hide, and that's effective.
Yeah.
Pennsylvania residents may have a lot of faith in their local leaders, Dave, but townships face a series of different challenges. What are some of the challenges that townships specifically must deal with?
Well, I think as you look at it, the level of unfunded mandates that come from out of town, whether those are from Washington or Harrisburg, with ideas that seem like a good idea from a distance, when you get to the business of implementing them locally, are not so much and may be costly. And maybe repetitive and maybe not needed in every community. I mean, one-size-fits-all solutions don't especially work. So that when you, as an example, when you see first federal highway regs then being passed on by PennDOT that says if you're going to be cutting the grass alongside the road and having your mower run along the road, you now have to position a second vehicle behind the mower from a safety perspective, so nobody hits the mower that's cutting the grass, which effectively doubles your cost of clearing the side the brush along the side of the road.
Yeah.
2 trucks, 2 people, and while it certainly makes the guy on the tractor safer, I'm not sure that it makes the second truck safer, because I mean somebody's hanging out there. So it again seemed like a good idea from a safety perspective. It becomes an incredibly costly burden to put forward at the local level and frankly at the state level, because PennDOT has to do it too, and it requires increased staffing allocations and the hiring of more people and the raising of costs to cut the grass.
So they should look into those new trucks that are powered. Do you see those ones that if somebody hits the back end, nobody's in the truck, it's just following along? They've got to look into that. Of course, but that's an added expense.
Autonomous mowers and remote control mowers.
Exactly. Autonomous cars. That's what it's a big truck.
Certainly could be an option, but they're pretty expensive.
They are
options,
expensive.
They're tough for everybody to afford.
Well, and they're not tried and tested completely yet, so we might need to wait a little bit. But what other creative ways have townships tried to deal with these unfunded mandates and address some of the added expenses that are coming down from both the state and the federal government?
Well, I think a lot of communities try and deal with them through intergovernmental cooperation and partnering with their neighbors, so that we see communities may, instead of everybody going out and bidding for a single product, they may, band together and do one bidding and lower the cost of the procurements. They may do cooperative ventures with road projects where one community provides the vehicle and the equipment, another community provides the materials, the road salt or the paving product, and another community may provide the labor or manpower, rather than having each community go out and buy a truck and buy their own blacktop and hire their own person. That you do what makes sense and lowers the cost, and everybody shares it and gets by on lower costs. Now that's not perfect for every community. Some communities it makes a lot more sense to do individually. I mean, some communities will do, have dirt and gravel roads, and some communities have paved 4 lanes, and there are different requirements and different rules and different safety standards.
But creativity is helping a great deal.
Creativity is helping considerably, and the other thing that's helping is the allowance of the use of common sense. And that we don't have.
It's funny that you even have to say that.
It is, and it's not something that we always see when government gets a little bit further removed, and you got a lot of folks either in Washington, which is probably the worst, or Harrisburg, which is next. But it seems like the further away from a community the government gets in terms of being in touch with the people, the less connected it gets, and the easier it gets to set a rule that seems to make sense from out of town, but if you were in town, you'd be going, what are they thinking?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Dave, spending and money seem to be at the heart of most government matters. How does local budgeting differ from state budgeting or from federal budgeting?
Well, I think at the local level, the budgets are crafted based on what you need rather than what you want. And that makes a huge difference. I mean, you deliver the things that you need in your community. There may be a whole lot of things that you want and be nice to have, and the hope fors and the woulda, coulda, shoulda. But in reality, you get the option of being able to do what you need based on what you can afford. And you don't start off with this giant laundry list of here's all the cool things that we're going to do, and then get to the end of the day and say, well, we don't have enough money for that. So are we going to raise taxes, or apply for grants, or play magic with our budget that shows revenue sources somewhere else that may or may not materialize?
So it's just like any family or small business has to do. You have to look at what the needs are versus the wants.
It is, and
I think I go through that on a daily basis.
I think we all do, and as seemingly odd as it is to have to say, the ability to use common sense is a not so common feature. The ability to live within your means, which all of our families have to do, is also not something that you can count on at every level.
So what role does PSATS play when it comes to educating local township officials on not just the creativity, but the budgeting and the leadership training? What sort of, how do you do this?
We have an incredibly intensive training and education effort, whether it's through webinars or classroom settings, our annual conference, where we'll have 3,500, 4,000 people come to town and learn from a bunch of subject matter experts, but also learn from each other. Mm-hmm. The sharing of best practices is incredibly helpful, and as we look at doing that, I mean, also for our members to recognize that in this day and age of technology, there's a lot of places you can go to get answers. I mean, you can ask Siri, or you can ask Alexa, or you can Google it. But the important thing that we want folks to know is that if you want the best, most credible, customized responses to local government questions, is you should ask PSATS. And that's what we're there for, and that's to share the best practices. We don't have to learn solutions every day to the same problems, mm-hmm. because we've had other people who experience them, and we get to share that among our members.
So you have a group of people, Dave, that are responsible for staying on top of the best practices and then sharing them with the folks across the Commonwealth?
We do. We have almost what's, if you will, what's called a knowledge, we call a knowledge center, which could be a combination of
A what center?
A knowledge center.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Which is a combination of our training and education, but also our member services and just the sharing of resources, whether those be files or documents on a shared website, or a discussion group where people pose questions and get answers from around the state of other people who have tried solutions, and we find out that in some cases the solution has been tried somewhere else. In some cases, what you were planning on doing, somebody else tried, and you know what? Guess what? It doesn't work.
Yeah.
So you don't have to learn the same experiments over and over at a cost and making those mistakes.
So with over 3,000 people coming to your annual conference, that must be just about everybody?
No, that's actually only about half.
Oh, wow.
We would be, I'm not sure what we would do if everybody showed up. Or where we would hold it.
Yeah.
Because it becomes, a place. I mean, we use the Hershey area and take over, a dozen or so hotels and the convention center, or their conference center. And we're pretty maxed out. We put on 80 different classes, so there's a lot of learning opportunities. But most of the learning opportunities are, while the classroom stuff is good, most of the learning opportunities are after the classroom and talking to each other.
Awesome.
Well, I've never seen the Hershey Motor Lodge so full as when you folks are having your conference there.
They do a tremendous job in accommodating all the things that are going on, and whether it's equipment or best practices, it's a one-stop shop for anyone in local government who wants to come and learn about best practices and experiences that others have.
Okay, well, thank you, Dave. We look forward to your next visit, and we hope that you'll visit with us again next week on Behind the Headlines. Tune in.